Hi, I'm Jon. I'm the CEO of Veridise. We are a security company. And so what I'm here to talk to you about is some of the observations that we've made during our security audits. So basically, we went and did a bunch of data analytics over over 100 security audits that we performed at Veridise. And I am basically here to report some observations that we found. So let me get started. So first of all, at Veridise, we perform a lot of ZK audits. So we audit, all parts of the blockchain ecosystem, but in particular, we perform a lot of ZK audits, and then we also have non-ZK audits. And so the important thing here is we can start, making some observations between the two. And one of the things that we observe that is, 55% of ZK audits contain at least one critical bug. So one thing that basically just breaks the entire protocol. If we compare that to non-ZK audits, so this would be infrastructure audits or smart contract audits, only about 27% of them have a critical issue. And so it's still about a quarter of the audits that we get in when it's non-ZK, which is still significant, but there is a reduction. And so the important fact here is that ZK audits or ZK protocols are about twice as likely to contain a critical issue. And that is very important. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. Right now, let's go ahead and take a look at some more of the data that we gathered from all of these 100 audits. So first of all, we can take a look at the types of issues that we generally find when we're auditing. And so the top 5 issues that we tend to find are logic errors, maintainability issues, data validation errors, usability issues, and denial of service problems. And so of these, by far the most common issue is logical errors. And the important thing here are logical errors are unique to your protocol. So they occur when you have logic that's implemented incorrectly, or you just did not think of a corner case or something along those lines. And so that is fairly important because it means that in order to actually find bugs, your auditor has to go and understand the protocol. And it means that things like tests and other types of techniques like that are capable of finding these bugs. And it kind of indicates how important it is to test protocols. The second most common issue that we find are maintainability issues. And so maintainability issues are problems that they aren't normally severe issues. They're just problems in your protocol that could turn into issues down the line, so as you continue to develop. So as an example, one of the most common source of maintainability issues is people using magic numbers. So just having a number somewhere in the protocol and that number is repeated all over the place. And the reason why this can become an issue is because if you decide to change that number, then you've got to go and update it in every single location, and it can easily turn into a bug. We found cases where people have, updated things incorrectly. And so maintainability issues are something that we commonly find, but they aren't severe. The next category, though, is severe. So a data validation issue occurs when basically you have inputs and they aren't properly validated. And so this means that someone can provide you with information that your protocol just doesn't expect, and it doesn't handle properly and can result in undefined behavior. And so these are just kind of some of the most common issues that we find. But we can zero in on the most significant issues, which is what we'll do next. So these are the most significant issues that we find. So they're the ones that we find that we classify as either critical or high and so on. They typically have a significant impact on the protocol, and they would have a significant impact on users if they were to be exploited. So we can see here that logical errors are still the most significant source of significant issues. So again, the most significant source comes from the business logic, or is in the business logic of your protocol. And so it's very important for people to understand that business logic and make sure it's free of errors. The next highest we also talked about, which is data validation issues. You have to make sure that when you take inputs from the users, they're actually, what you expect, they're actually properly validated. The next most significant issue, though, is unique to ZK circuits. So they're under-constrained circuits, which you might have heard about previously. So an under-constrained circuit allows someone to manipulate data in the witness, so basically manipulate data in ways that you don't expect, and then to have that proven. And we'll talk about some of these significant issues later, so I'm just going to go through them very quick. And so the next one that we have are denial of service issues. So it's basically, or a denial of service issue occurs when your contract or your protocol can enter a state that it's not possible to exit from. So this basically breaks the protocol for either a user or a group of users. And then finally, the last most significant, or the fifth most significant issue, the last one that we have up here, is access control issues. If you've developed on Solidity, you likely know what this is. It's basically just making sure that the proper users are the only ones who have the ability to execute certain functions. The next thing that we can look at, though, is a breakdown of the issues to see if there is an issue in the protocol, how likely is it to be severe? And so what we can see here is part of the reason why ZK circuits have such a high number of critical issues is because one of the most common issues that we find in ZK protocols are under-constrained circuits. And so that corresponds to a problem because, as you can see, an under-constrained circuit is the most likely to be a severe issue if it is found. The next most severe issue, or the next most likely to be a severe issue, we classify as a crash. So this basically occurs in infrastructure where someone can essentially force that infrastructure to crash in some way, and it usually results in some sort of a denial of service issue, but it can have other unintended consequences like, if a validator crashes, it could cause stability issues in your blockchain and so on. And then finally, the third most significant issue that we report to users, or the third most likely to be a significant issue that we report, is just straight theft. And so we classify something as theft as, the case where if someone can access funds that they should not be able to access. And the reason why that isn't always significant is because sometimes it's very difficult to do that, or they can only access a very small number of funds. Okay, so now I've told you about, some of these issues that we commonly find in protocols, but let's take a look at some of the impacts that they might have if they actually ended up in your project. And we can do that by looking at, previous hacks. So let's first start with logical errors. As we talked about previously, that is the most common significant issues that we find in audits. So basically, a logical error occurs when when the protocol implementation doesn't match the desired specification. And so in this particular case, you might have a user, they're interacting with a smart contract, and that smart contract doesn't behave as expected. So for example, in the example that I have right there, you can see that a user might be calling withdraw. However, the balance of a user might only be read, but it's never updated. So this is something that we might classify as a logical error. And we can see cases where logical errors have actually, made it into production and have resulted in hacks. So this is a case where there was an ERC 404, and if you look at this, it might look okay. The problem is this particular protocol didn't consider the case where the individual specified as from was equal to 2. And the reason why this is an error is because if those two are equal, you'll see that it first decrements the balance of the from user, but then it increments the balance of the to user without retrieving that balance again. So that means that someone can effectively use this particular function to mint funds for themselves by essentially just transferring funds from themselves to themselves. And so this was a very significant issue that made it into production, and this particular company did not recover. So now let's take a look at data validation issues. So data validation issues correspond to cases where someone interacts with the smart contract in unexpected ways. So as an example, you can see a group of users here, and someone might call a withdrawal function, but they might request more funds than what they have in their balance. And if they do that, then what can happen is, they can over-withdraw their balance and an overflow can be caused. In Solidity, this is now very uncommon because there's overflow protections on, all the time, but this used to be a very common issue. And so data validation issues occur when a function accepts values that can trigger some undefined or unexpected behavior. So we can take a look at an example where this, again, made it into production and what happened. So this is what happened with the Nomad bridge, which corresponds to one of the biggest hacks that we have seen. So basically, what happened with Nomad is they allowed their admin to initialize their bridge, but their admin made a mistake. And they made a mistake because they set this committed route to 0. And because that committed route was 0 and all mappings default to returning 0, essentially it meant that anyone who submitted a message to Nomad had that message approved. And so that meant that someone could simply submit a message to Nomad that said, I am sending all of the tokens, and then Nomad happily went and did that, and it resulted, again, in one of the biggest thefts that we've seen in this ecosystem. When you have an under-constrained circuit, another user can provide an alternate witness generator, which essentially generates proofs that yours cannot generate. And the reason why that's important is because if these are accepted by the prover and then the verifier, then they can essentially prove unintended things, or they can create ZK proofs that you do not intend, and then those proofs can be accepted by your verifier, and it can, again, cause unintended actions to take place. So we can take a look at when this actually occurred in the wild. And Tornado Cache actually had an under-constrained circuit in their implementation. The important thing here is Tornado Cache eventually caught it before anyone actually exploited it. But the reason why this is important is the way Tornado Cache tried recovering from this is by exploiting their own protocol. And so the reason why they had to do that is because they couldn't actually withdraw the funds out. They didn't know who the funds belonged to. And so they had to go and exploit their protocol before someone else did. And the way that they did that is by taking advantage of this particular bug. And so this bug occurred because there were no constraints on this particular out value. And that value corresponded to the root of a Merkle tree. And so because Tornado Cache relied on a Merkle tree to store user balances, basically what someone could do is they could supply a Merkle tree that wasn't actually valid, but then they could overwrite the root. So essentially, they've got a Merkle tree that does not actually hash to the correct root, but you could provide an alternate witness where you say that it does. And then as a result, you could request that Tornado Cache withdraw whatever they want. And so, again, luckily they took advantage of this themselves, but when they did so, or to do so, they basically just drained their pool, which anyone could have done, not just them, in order to, essentially put those funds in a safe place until they could launch a new, or basically, launch an update and fix the protocol so that people wouldn't be impacted. Okay. So clicker is, okay. So those are a look at some of the most significant issues that we commonly find in audits, both in ZK audits and regular audits. And some of you might be wondering, what can I do to protect myself from these things? Well, the most important thing that you can do is test your protocol, but also to receive a security audit. Because one thing that has been found in literature is that the combination of high test coverage and professional security audits can drastically decrease the chances that you will have an exploit and that a vulnerability will make it into production. Thank you.